Hiya, welcome again to another Thursday live session with me, Yoni Joe. And for those who haven't seen these before, I'm an adoption coach and I'm an adopter and I'm also a social worker. I've been working with children in care and foster carers and adopters for over 30 years. So welcome to this live, and what I want to talk about today is what social workers look for when they're considering matching decisions. And a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about refer to adopters or foster carers. I think a lot of the decisions are the same. Obviously, there are some differences for adoption or fostering, and I'm particularly thinking about long-term fostering, so where a child is going to come and hopefully live in that family for a considerable period of time, hopefully until they're 18. So social workers will be given a number of families to consider, and there might be families in different areas, and there may be families from different backgrounds when they're considering what is the most suitable match for a particular child. And in many cases, those families will live relatively close to where the child is from, but not immediate in that immediate vicinity because of confidentiality issues. And so social workers who will make these decisions will be the ones who are responsible for that child, and they by the nature of the system in the UK at least will be local authority social workers, and they will know the child, know the family, and know the background. So they will probably look at a family who are geographically quite close, maybe within a couple of hours journey, because the logistics of introductions can be quite difficult when they live at very far-flung places. But that there are some situations where they may look further afield if there's a difficult sort of to match the child's needs in the local area, perhaps due to ethnicity or a particular health issue. They might look further afield, or also if the family is very well known, they may want the child to go out further so that their confidentiality is maintained. So they'll probably shortlist um, 3 or maybe 4 families and look to compare. And that's quite a difficult sort of task, really, because families are obviously very different. But they'll balance things like how many other children are there in the family? Do they feel that the adopted or foster child will get sufficient attention? Um, and also what sort of background, both ethnicity, but also some of the more family focused things like, are they a very sporty family? Um, does the child have interests that perhaps they might have in common? Or is it a very academic family? And those sorts of things will be taken into consideration. What they'll also want to do is to balance the needs of the child and the skills of the adopter or foster carer. So perhaps if the child's maybe got some learning needs, then they might be more likely to consider a family who've perhaps got an education background. Um, but it's very helpful to sort of put your most positive spin on your family, and you're encouraged to do a profile for your family when you're being considered. And that's something that you can get some guidance from First for Adoption. That's First, and then for the number adoption. And that they give quite a lot of detail about things that you could include in a profile. But it's good to have a little bit of humour, something that is quite relatable, and so that it's engaging. But it's not a test of your ability to do graphic design or printing or anything like that. It's really important that the child and the foster care and the social worker get a real sense of your personality, because that's what will make you as a potential match stand out. So some of the other things that social workers will be looking for in particular, and so you might have an advantage if these things sort of marry with you, is they will look for people who are open to adopting or fostering older children. And by older, we now mean 3 or 4, because as children get over that age, then it's much harder to find families for them, sadly. They'd be looking for families who would be willing to care for siblings, sibling group, and sibling group could mean 2, doesn't have to mean 4 or 5 children coming to live with you. And also Black and ethnic minority children, and we've talked about transracial adoption before, or same, obviously same race placements, but Black children and particularly Black boys are considered to be hard to place, even without any additional needs. Children with disabilities, if families are willing to care for children with disabilities, then that's a real benefit, and will certainly get the attention of social workers. And finally, fostering to adopt. So in the UK, this is the system, or it's also called concurrent planning. And this is the system where instead of the child having the moves in the process when they're removed from birth parents, they will go to a family who will look after them temporarily. And if the plan is for that child to be adopted, then that family will take on that adoption. So that is quite a big ask for a family, because you obviously have the risk that the plan doesn't remain adoption, and therefore that the child is perhaps placed back with family or with a relative friend of the birth family. But the advantages for concurrent planning or foster to adopt is that the child will come potentially, if they're very young, they might come from hospital having been born and come to you. There will be obviously that bonding period, and then if the child doesn't go back to birth family, then you've got a really secure, confident child, because they've effectively known you all their life. So that's also something to think about. And I think a lot of UK local authorities are really encouraging adopters to adopt in that way if you're considering having very little children. Also, something that you can consider post approval or in the UK is Linkmaker, and that's a social enterprise which allows online searching for children and matching. So you can put your details into Linkmaker as a potential match, and you can also look at children who are looking for families. And that different local authorities or different agencies who've approved have different rules about when you can do that, but that's obviously something to consider too. When some of the other things that a social worker will consider is the child's identified needs and matching that with your parenting skills. So, and that doesn't always mean that you have to have parented before, but through the assessment, there will have been some expectation of evidencing your parenting ability. The child's health will be quite a consideration. Will the prospective family be willing to take them to health appointments, to review their health needs? And it's important that the social worker considers the child's future health needs as well. So things that maybe aren't pertinent now, but maybe in the future, particularly around parental drug use, mental health. Have parents abused drugs in the past, or would they potentially have the risk of viral infections? Those are the sorts of things. Obviously, you're expecting to sort of predict the future, and that's not possible. But families will have the opportunity to talk to medical experts about the child at the point of matching. So it is something that you can go into greater detail about. And obviously, when you have a birth child, you have no guarantees about their health. But it's important to sort of be realistic about what you as a family can cope with and what you can't. I think it's also important to ask for health records, and if they should be volunteered for you, but it's important to have an opportunity to read them, to reflect, maybe write questions, and then if it's not volunteered, to ask to have a session with the responsible paediatrician so that they can explain anything that you're not clear about. I'm not going to go through all of the needs, but another one that I will talk about is a child's educational needs and how social workers will try and match their education. And this is something that when my partner and I we were talking to my oldest daughter, our first adopted daughter's social worker. She was asking us, because we're both professional and our children were both doing pretty well in school. She asked, well, what will happen if this child isn't educationally achieving, doesn't achieve what you're a family of high achievers, how are you going to cope with that? And it's certainly something to think about, because again, you don't have guarantees. And at the point that she came to us, she was delayed. Now I think that delay probably was more about her perhaps not getting the attention in a foster placement that she should have done, but you don't know how the child's going to turn out, and so you have to anticipate and think through some of those eventualities. And from our point of view, we wanted to go ahead anyway, even if she did have learning needs in the end. So the social worker will also think about how potential families will support the child to do homework, to do learning, whether if the child's very young, then we won't necessarily know what their educational needs are going to be. If they're older, they may well, as a lot of looked after children do, have special educational needs or attention deficit disorder type behaviours. So it's really important for the match to be able to understand that, to find out about it, and for the social worker to feel confident that those child's needs around those areas will be considered. And something I think it's helpful if you're considering to be matched with a school-aged child is to actually start to make contact with school area, provision in your local area. Even before you're starting to think of a child, a specific child, it's useful to go and have a chat with the school, um, and see not only what they do academically, but also what is their sort of more philosophical attitude. Are they supportive of looked after children? Are they supportive of adopted children? Because some schools can struggle with them, particularly those who are very academic. They can sometimes struggle with caring for a child who's got additional needs. So it's quite important to have a look at that, have a look at their Ofsted records to see what kind of support that they provide. And also it's helpful to sort of think about what your aspirations for a child would be, and the social worker will really be looking for a family who are flexible, who are going to meet the child where the child is, rather than try and impose their own expectations or aspirations onto the child. And there's, I guess, ways that you can evidence that in your profile, and make sure that that is reflected in the paperwork that you have, because the social worker initially will only see your details as a written document, and so it's quite, if through the assessment process you get to read it and you think, actually this doesn't give a completely good sense of me and of my family as a personality, then I think it's quite helpful to sort of ask the social worker to maybe rewrite a little bit of it, or to add something for yourself, so that document really does reflect your family and the diversity and the challenges in the family, but also the kind of household that this child is going to enter, because that is the document that the social worker will first see. And obviously, as the process of matching continues, then they will get to meet you, but that is their first impression. In the UK, as a part of the matching process, there are opportunities once a social worker feels that, yeah, this family is one that I really strongly want to consider. It's useful to have conversations with the current carers of the child, if that's possible. And you will have opportunities to meet with the child. And sometimes that might be bump into meetings, which are opportunities to meet the child with the carer and maybe not identify yourself as prospective adopters or foster carers, but to just meet them in a quite informal situation, maybe going to the park or something like that. And I think the feeling is that helps the adopters or foster carers to sort of bond and start to think about the child because they've already met them, rather than the child being a description on a piece of paper. But also for the child, when the discussion is introduced, that they already know what the prospective family look like or parents look like. And so that can be quite powerful. Another thing I probably should mention in the process of trying to match with a child is activity days, and those are obviously, through COVID they haven't been happening, but in all likelihood they will be happening more now going forward. when you might have the opportunity to go perhaps to an event that's organised sometimes by local authorities or by charities, where a number of children will be present with and a number of adoptive. This is largely around adoption, where a number of adoption families will come, and there'll be activities and opportunities to play. And the aim is really to sort of have an opportunity to meet a variety of children who are awaiting adoption, and that is a day that's only open to approved adopters. So you wouldn't get an invite to that until you've been through panel and you've been approved as a prospective adopter. And some people can feel it's a bit challenging, but I think the evidence suggests that what it does is perhaps make adopters think outside the box a little bit, because I think one of the things that's maybe not talked about a great deal in terms of matching is about people's chemistry. And there has to be some kind of chemistry that either is present or develops. And that's something that's quite hard to assess and impossible to assess when you're reading a document or you're looking at pictures. But I think people who go to activity days, they might find that they build a bond or a relationship, or really connect with a child that they wouldn't have considered on paper. They probably wouldn't have considered. So it's really gives that opportunity for a bit of personality in the whole matching process. So I hope that's been helpful. Really love to hear your comments, particularly for people who are at that stage. I know it's really anxiety provoking. It's also incredibly exciting. I guess the one thing I would say just before I finish is that it's important to really try and examine how you feel about a particular child, and not to feel bad if, on consideration, looking at all the information that you have, that you don't feel like you can meet that child's need. It's so much more important to do that, to say that then, than go ahead feeling perhaps like you're not quite sure. That's hard. I know it's hard. And my partner and I, we were in the position of the first couple of children that were discussed with us. We didn't feel were appropriate. One was looked almost Caucasian in a family where we're very dark skinned, and it just felt like that wouldn't have. In fact, if I remember rightly, he was blonde. And that felt like that would be hard on that child, because people would see that they weren't necessarily from a birth family. And when we talked about to a social worker about a child who had very severe disabilities, and we got the impression that maybe they were thinking about that child for us because we weren't straight, because we were two women, and that I know has been reflected in some of the research, in some of the matching decisions historically. I think that probably happens less now, because there's a recognition that I think 1 in 7 adopters are LGBTQ now. So I'm hoping that those sorts of stereotypes are less obvious. But okay, I'm going to stop it there. So I'm really pleased that you could join, and I hope that you found it useful, and really good luck in your match. And I'll speak to you again soon. Take care.